We hear a lot about, being player-led and player-centered and all those types of buzzwords, which are right, and like we should be trying to do those things. But trying to captivate your players and make their experience, which might only be an hour on a Tuesday night, like trying to make that the best part of their week is really important. Winning games and competing and poring over data is not why young people join their respective sports. There's got to be a hook. There's got to be a reason why children come to our training sessions. Every year I put a weekly topic that I call challenging your assumptions. So I deliberately get guest speakers in who I know work in the complete polarized opposite world to them.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Recently I have been fascinated about all the conversations we've had about player development, but also how connected and interrelated they are to coach development. So does your philosophy towards player development actually extend towards how coaches should be developed? Personal and professional development as well. There are not many better people to talk about this topic than Ashley Gumbrell, and that's who we've got today. Coach developer, head of coaching, player developer, and also lecturer at St. Mary's University. I'm sure you're aware from our Fiorentina trip, which St. Mary's kindly sponsored. St. Mary's University, performance football coaching masters. We'll put the information below. We've also got some more information at the break about it. Please check it out. Again, massive thanks to St. Mary's. Because of this type of support and the support that you give us with the likes, the subscriptions and the shares, we're able to take trips, get out as much content as we can, and give away free content as well, modernsoccercoach.com. So massive thanks to Ashley. We've got quite a few topics on here: player development, engagement in training, coach development, how to organize and structure that, and also his work with Minute 9. Unbelievable insight into so many different aspects. Here is Ashley. Enjoy. All right, Ashley, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Excited to chat?
Yeah, no, really good. I've been a listener for a long time and followed everything you've done. So it's a good coaching moment to be on this side.
Oh, thank you. A topic that I feel we've done, we just released one last week. We've got another one in the pipeline as well. This is a topic that I don't know whether I'm chasing it because I'm so intrigued by it, or I don't know whether it's a hot topic in the coaching community, or it's just a hot topic in my head. We're going to kick it off with this component of environments that obviously there's a change now with. We're getting a little bit more awareness, I think, in coaching community about the fact that it's still very much coach-led, whether it's dropout rates or enjoyment rates or just feedback we're getting that these environments could be way better. So you sent me a presentation and the title just jumped out at me, was Captivating Players. And that's the first time I've ever heard that language around captivating, which is, to me, says that you're making a conscious, deliberate attempt to bring attention to everything going on rather than just assuming that they're going to be enthusiastic. Can you talk a little bit about whether that's correct or not, or whether I'm on the right tracks, and what's the thinking behind it?
Yeah. So I was asked to speak at a conference, and I had this idea of like captivating players to kind of sum up a philosophy. I should credit somebody else actually for the idea at the very least. I was reading a newsletter. Alex Lascu does some Skillak stuff and has a great newsletter. I was reading her newsletter a few months ago, and she had a quote from a musician who was talking about being captivating as opposed to being captive to the audience and what they want to hear. And he was talking about it, and she was talking about it from the lens of like creativity. And it really got me thinking. So when I got asked to speak at this conference, I thought I'd take that idea into coaching. And my philosophy really is, we hear a lot about, being player-led and player-centered and all those types of buzzwords, which are right and, play their way. And they're all correct. Like, we should be trying to do those things. But like trying to captivate your players and make their experience, which might only be an hour on a Tuesday night, like trying to make that the best part of their week is really important. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in talent ID and player metrics and GPS and all that sort of stuff. But the environments that I work in, at the very least, in particular the foundation phase, like captivating your players with really great tasks, even if it's not football, like even if you do a bit of tag rugby or something, just to captivate them and make them go, wow, that was the best hour of my week. I sometimes feel like we forget about that, and we get caught up in some of the other stuff, the adult competitive stuff, and the metrics and all that sort of thing. So yeah, captivating players. So I had a few ideas around some analogies to help explain what that looks like for me.
Great start. Yeah, it seems to be that we are in this era of, it's an information era. Obviously, it's so accessible, and then it's very, very easy to, when we didn't have access to all this information, we would look at high performing environments and think, I think we're a lot more curious about them. But today we're looking for, maybe that ties in with, it's more accessible and we are more impatient. So we're looking for, just tell me what you do. Okay, I've got your curriculum, your periodization, your GPS numbers, and then I'll do the same thing and it'll look the same. But that takes away from, again, all these things that maybe you can't measure, the charisma, the connection. How do we get back to that?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, because when you go on coach education courses, you get guided with the tech stuff, which, a lot of people feel like they need. And sometimes I think we forget about the personal bits and pieces, both the personal skills that we have that we don't get taught on coach education, and probably rightly so, because it's very difficult to teach 36 people in a room like I am next week, personal skills and psychology. But we also forget about the players and like why they play, like winning games and competing and poring over data is not why young people join their respective sports. Like, there's loads of data. And I just talked about data on a negative side, but there's loads of data and research that suggests that, fitness and playing with teammates and fun ultimately is the reason they play. So I think sometimes we just need to reconnect with those things first before we do any of the other stuff. Children are going to be competitive, and as they go through the age groups, they're going to want to win, and they're going to want to learn, and they're going to want to develop. That stuff's going to happen. And those great players with the things that we as adults think are great, they'll always rise to the top, I'm sure. But I think sometimes we just forget that captivating our players and giving them a really fun experience for the first 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it might be, that can catapult them into the rest of their life to be healthy and play sport and become coached in the future. And sometimes I think we can, as adults, we are looking for the wrong thing maybe. So yeah, for me, it's just about captivating them and trying to remember the reasons why they play first and foremost before we worry about anything else.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I have a 9-year-old who's now going through a football experience and has very little interest in it. And I wonder if that's, I've never really, he's got 100 football jerseys. He wouldn't kick a ball in 5 weeks if there wasn't something on that he had to do it. But there's this purity about when he plays. I'm always judging whether he actually thinks it's interesting or not. And I wonder if are we at a stage where kids have more choice over, again, the tech that's in front of them every single day? And do we actually have an obligation to make the environment a little bit more engaging? Whereas, again, in my era, when I went to the leisure centre on a Tuesday night, it was really cold. It was old football. It was all the stuff was just rubbish, but the football was the only thing we were there for. And it's a different era today. So I guess I'm asking if you think that, should there be more onus on the coach to actually not entertain, but like you said, engage and get them involved in the game and maybe experience it a bit more? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because I think, like, if you think about your example, and I was the same, I would go with my mates to the local bit of greenery in the field, like behind my house. But we went because it was social and it was fun, and it was still competitive. But we would try stuff, and the ball would go over someone's garden, and you had to, play shotgun. Who was going to be the one to go over and jump the fence without getting caught by the neighbour, right? All those little things. But we did that because it was fun. Like, there was no parents, there was no structure. We organised it ourselves. No one taught us those things, but we had those. We developed those skills just by doing it. And I think for me, like, there's got to be a hook. There's got to be a reason why children come to our training sessions. Yeah, that might be initially because their parents have seen a flyer on Facebook or whatever, and they want to get you into a certain sport because they played, and there might be a bit of a nudge. But we need a hook, right? We need to keep them engaged. So for me, the best way to do that is to have fun, like meet them where they're at as well. So, like, for example, I'll give you an example from this week. So I just started teaching my son's under 6 going into under 7s. He's only played a little bit of football. I wouldn't say hugely into football, but he's getting into it. And on Saturday we were down at the session, and he chatted to me in the week around how he played rounders. So those in the States who might be listening, a kind of version of kind of softball, baseball, like you hit it, you run. That's the basic premise. And he was so engaged in this like sport. So actually I thought, well, I was going to scrap what I was going to do on Saturday, my session plan. I was going to do some small-sided games and all this stuff that I, as a coach educator, think is the right thing to do. And he said, oh, well, all of my mates who are going on Saturday happened as well. They're all in the same class. They all loved this game of rounders. So, okay, well, why don't we just play a game of adapted rounders? Let's play football rounders. You know, one player kicks the ball in. We have some batters. They smash the ball up, and we put some goals strategically. If you shoot the ball into the goal from the mound, from the batting mound, you get 5 points, and it counts as a rounder. If you just try to place or pass it into the outfield, you get to run the bases, and you get a rounder or a home run, whatever it might be in the version. And we just did that instead. Like, my session plan went out the window. Me and the coach, who probably thought we were being quite clever with all these small-sided games and constraints and all this sort of stuff, is like, well, actually, they're going to have great fun. They're really enthused about this game they did at PE on Wednesday that they've never seen before. They all know the rules because their PE teacher taught them. So when they turned up on Saturday, we're going to do rounders. Everyone knew it. I didn't have to explain the game that much. And we just played loads of rounds of that. And I could then have a conversation with my son around like rounders and how much he loved it, because he could relate it to something he'd done. So that's just like where we met them halfway, or we're all the way really. And, you know, they were shooting, and they were they were aiming and developing their technique, but it was just a load of fun. That was kind of the way I looked at it anyway.
It seems to be, you know, again, thinking about this, where do I start with this? Thinking about this from a coaching standpoint about the environment, and thinking about this group of young coaches that are now entering, you know, I mean young as the disconnect between my age and theirs starts to increase. And I see them being closer to the tech savvy generation that were coming in, but also, you know, in an age to relate to them and all that great stuff. But when they're coming in, I get really excited about this new generation of coach that is going to be able to connect way better now for all those reasons. But then I also, when I sometimes observe coaching in environments, I see young coaches coaching in the same way that they were coached. And you referenced no laps, no lectures, no lines, no lingo.
Yeah, they're the principles that I'm head of coaching at a grassroots club, and those are our 4 principles that we try and, or 4 rules, I should say. Those are our rules, and then we have some principles off the back of that, but those are our general rules we try.
And that's, when I saw it, I thought, well, that's a good way to kind of break that. Is that designed to kind of break bad habits or old habits for a coach?
Yeah, exactly that. And look, that's context specific as well. So I'm head of coaching at a club, grassroots, 23 teams based in London. We've got 4 or 5 paid coaches who deliver 1 night a week, and the boys, and it is mainly boys at the moment, they then have 1 other training session. So 1 with the paid coaches who've got some qualifications, and then they do 1 with their parent helpers effectively. That's generally who it is. So we've got probably around about 30 volunteers who are parents who've never done a coaching badge, and he or she comes from loads of different backgrounds, and they don't really know what they're doing in the nicest possible way. So they don't have a reference point. Their only reference point is how they were taught, and that's fair enough, right? I can't criticize them for that, because what else would you do? Like, you know, that's fine. So we just put those principles in place with the underpinning element of trying to captivate the players, like make it fun. So, you know, I could go in and I could educate them, and I could probably bore them to death, and I could watch over their shoulder with a clipboard and do coach education that way, but I can't do that. So I kept it simple and just said at the start of the season, here's 4 rules. We're going to call them the 4 L's. Just try and avoid to do those things, because they haven't got the time or money, or haven't been able to go on coaching courses to receive the education themselves. So how can we try and get some very simple principles into them that they can follow? They can look at their session plan, they can look at what's going on in front of on the astro or grass in front of them, and just very quickly look at it through the lens of the 4 L's. And if they see one of them, they can make some changes. And I can do some one-to-one and coach education along the season, which I've done, but it just gives those 30 parent coach volunteers something to kind of hang their hat on, to go, oh, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, brilliant. It brings us along nicely then, the environment then that you're as a leader, because I think this is a challenge for leaders in the US, where again, numbers of coaches, where you're looking at that parent coach, you're looking at that micro coach, grassroots coach that's coming in and saying, you know, they can do a couple of nights a week and they don't necessarily have the education or the experience. When you're going around then, and you mentioned there about having one-to-ones and a little bit of feedback, what's the general, again, a question I hear, you can't measure obviously success in this, but like, how do you subjectively walk around and say, yeah, I like if it's the vibe or the ambience about the environment, what are the things that kind of jump out to you?
Do you know what, that's actually really timely. So on Monday night, we had a session this week. Monday and Tuesday, we had our paid coaches run the session, and I design the session plan. It's just how it works in our environment. So I design a session plan for all the age groups, and we roughly try and follow it. So what we did is we had 4 pitches, and we did like a little carousel. One was a game of football, one was a game of American football. So we had an American football. The novelty of the American football, by the way, like they absolutely went mad for it, just by changing the equipment. Then we had one pitch, which was a game of capture the flag, where they have to run beyond the goal, grab it, steal a cone, and try and get back without getting tagged. And then we had another pitch where they played a game of football, but there were 6 cones lined up on the side of the pitch, and there were 6 different footballs or balls. So there was like a tiny little ball. There was a volleyball, which obviously flies all over the place. There was one of those like triangular shaped balls that's like a reaction ball. There was a football, and there was another type of football ball, and I can't remember what it was. And they had to move around every 10 minutes. They'd go and experience something else. So short, sharp bursts of something a bit random. And that was bookmarked by 10 minutes on their pitch with their coach at the start and the end, where they just played football, no coaching. So in the 40 minutes in the middle, they rotated round and had all these like really cool experiences. So there was some novelty, and we need to be wary of the novelty effect, that, you know, you can't do it every week because it stops becoming a novelty. But to answer your question, as I walked around, there was just this vibe, buzz, whatever it was. And as the kids came to the pitch where there were the 5 footballs, I could tell some of the parents were a bit like, what are we doing? Like, our season's finished, by the way, as well. So we're not teaching them anything for the weekend. And I could kind of get away with it as a result. But the kids were just like, oh my God, I can't wait to get to that ball. Oh, like, what are we going to do when we get that ball? How are you going to play? And they were having those conversations. And as the coach was explaining the game, which didn't take very long because it was pretty easy, you just play for 2 minutes with each ball and see how many goals you score. Like, the players were just so engaged, and I went around and spoke to the coaches, and they had noticed like the engagement levels just had shot up. You know, that might say something about the other sessions that I'd planned for them, but the novelty of like doing something a bit different and then moving on to the American football pitch, there's still to transfer of the physical skills and the tactical skills, which we still talked about and coached. But the American football, the random balls that changed direction and flew over, you could see them physically moving their bodies and like manipulating their bodies to change the type of ball to make a different pass. And there was a real buzz around the group. You could just tell that they were having a great time. It's difficult to bottle that up, but you kind of just get a gut feeling when you watch the sessions. There's a different like vibe to it.
No, I think it's so powerful. And I think the ability, whether that's intuition as a leader or little bit of honesty, or the fact that there's just a general enthusiasm, you can read those things. Because again, sometimes you go to environments now where, again, not necessarily grassroots, but in this academy or competitive, I suppose would be the word. I wouldn't say elite, because it's not what it is. It's competitive, but the coaches are still, again, trying to do the right thing. Something that really, it's a bugbear of mine, pyramids of balls, where they've got 10 balls and they've put them all up like that there, and every cone is meticulously, you know, almost where, I suppose, in one hand, it's really good setup where the coach has thought about this and has got there early, but on the other hand, you've gone on the spectrum so much that it's created a clinical environment that there is no excitement. And, you know, again, from a parent standpoint, looking at that, and I want to go back to what you said about the parents were like, what's this? And a parent going the other way can say, this is great, you know, because in America they're paying for that. So yeah. I wonder if, again, I guess what I'm asking is, I wonder if the external drives much of that, if it takes a little bit of a risk to say, do you know what, I'm going to do something a bit different today because I feel this environment stagnating slightly.
Yeah, I think the fact that our season had finished was part of the reason. I try and every month or every 6 weeks, we try and do a multi-sport night where we deliberately on at least one pitch and the players might rotate. We do something different. So, tag games, especially for the younger players, like dodging and weaving skills. There's some logic behind it, but there's also some stagnation. There's also some, it's good for the coaches. We also try and do some kind of inter-age group, 3v3 tournaments every 6 weeks. So every kind of 4 weeks, they might have a block and then they might get a multi-sport night and a tournament night. And I think that's important just to avoid that stagnation. Like I said, we're kind of out of the season now. So we've got a kind of 4 or 5 week, maybe 6 week block where there's a bit of no man's land. You haven't got fixtures to prepare for. The numbers have started to drop. People go and play other sports. Summer's come in, and we won't start pre-season until the summer. So it's kind of a bit of an odd one. But actually, that's an opportunity to try and showcase our philosophy. And the parents would have seen that we've done these slightly more random, we've used match play cards where they have a whole night where they just turn a card over and they perform the task. And some of the parents do question that sometimes around what's the purpose. And it's just trying to link them back and, I guess, educate them. We do a monthly blog where we try and say, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. Ask Ashley any questions, all those types of things. So I may have drifted away from what your question was, but we try and avoid that stagnation and I deliberately do that. And I also say that to the coaches. Coaches get bored. They coach for 2 hours, then they go and have them later in the week. It can be very easy to fall into traps and routine. And I don't think that's the fun. That takes away from the fun of it. And therefore, that's what we're kind of there for, especially at our grassroots. We've got some great players, by the way, and they're competitive and they want to play, especially the younger age groups. We want that hook needs to be there. Where's the fun? Where's it captivating us? But that comes with challenges with parents, which might be another question or something altogether.
Yeah. Oh, it could be a separate. I don't want to go away from this, but see the bit they're saying about coaches getting bored. I'm convinced that a large percentage of coaches today are absolutely bored, and I don't blame them. It sounds as if it's attack that they look bored, but I think a lot of them have done, again, almost followed the guidelines of being prepared and having a philosophy and getting their work together. But again, do that for 3-4 years consistently, and anyone at any walk of life, it becomes quite monotonous. And you lose a little bit of fulfillment with that.
Yeah, and I think coaches maybe, I work in a university, and whenever I speak to coaches, and we've got a football degree, the first thing they talk about is what's it like to work in an academy, and academies do great. This is not knocking academies. I think they do some great stuff. Some of them, the philosophy, regardless of the individual club, but just the philosophy in the academy, in my mind, is a bit backwards. And I have worked in them. But the students, they fixate on that. It's can we go and observe academy coaches? Can we have academy coaches come in? Or when can we go and observe that under 21s game, which we do as part of our course? And I sometimes say to them about that professional development module, we say, what's your dream job? Our academy first team. So actually, there's a lot of coaching. There's far more players that aren't in those environments because they're grassroots and they need different things, but they focus on that. And I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was in that situation. I was early 30s. There was an academy development centre down the road from me, 30 seconds from my house. Pay wasn't great, but I thought it'll look good on my CV. And I used to go to that session, and for the first 45 minutes, and I won't say the club because I don't think that's fair, but for the first 45 minutes, we had a prescribed coaching session. Ball manipulation, 20 minutes, and they had to dribble through cones, and the cones had to be in the exact, and I'm not joking, we had people come down and they would measure them out. 7 cones, players would dribble through, and then they'd come back, and that was 20 minutes, and it had to be non-stop. The idea was to get 200-300 touches straight away into a 20 by 20 box, 15 players, wherever it might be, ball manipulation, ball mastery, whatever you want to call it. And we had 10, Ronaldo chops, whatever it was. There were 10 skills we had to teach them. So for the first 45 minutes, there was no coaching. The players, after 3 or 4 weeks, could have run it themselves. 20 minutes through the cones, and that is boring, by the way. If you dribble through cones for 20 minutes, and then the rest of the time you're just watching the person in front of you go, then ball manipulation. And I, as a coach, after a year, it just drove me absolutely insane. It was like watching paint dry, and you would try and G yourself up, and you try and encourage the players, use development foot and all this stuff we used to talk about. But I had enough experience behind me, and I was confident in my philosophy about captivating players that I thought I was right. And the academy has done great stuff, and it's attached to a great club. But for me as a coach, I felt comfortable enough to go to the head of that centre and go, this isn't for me. Like, I'm done. But if I was a young coach who needed the money, who was trying to get my foot in the door for the first time, I wasn't any of those things. It was a convenient. I thought it'd be good experience, but I was comfortable enough in my philosophy. It was so far removed from my philosophy. I felt comfortable enough to go, this isn't for me. And I could do that. I'm lucky that I've got a full-time job in football and I don't need the money. I've got a young family, but other people aren't in that situation. So you just become, you go on this merry-go-round. And look, not every academy is like that. I get that. They're not that prescribed. But for the first 40 minutes, I've never seen anything like it. It was like watching robots. And I won't say what colour kit they wore because that might give it away. But it was like watching robots all in the same colour kit, just like going through the motions.
Yeah, I can relate to that because, there's a part of it where you're part of the organisation too. So you've got to be the company guy. But at the same time, if you don't believe in something, like if you do that over the period of 6 to 12 months, or some people are doing that a lot longer, that becomes detrimental, I would say. Yeah,
it's really tricky. But a lot of people wouldn't be in a situation and fortunate enough to be able to pull away from that situation. And I think ultimately, I could ask the club, why do we do this? And I did a couple of times, not in a challenging way, but they would say, right, this is 1,000 touches of the ball in the first 40 minutes. That's what we want. Technical repetition. Again, I'm fortunate that I work as a lecturer, and we look at skill acquisition, and the research would suggest that that's maybe not the best way for long-term skill development anyway. The club obviously didn't look at it that way, and that's fine. But then it comes back to my philosophy. My philosophy is around captivating players, and I could tell the players hated it. I never asked them because I'm wearing the kit, so that wouldn't be fair for me to undermine the philosophy as a club. But if you ask the players, and look, age-old thing, when are we playing a game? When are we moving on? That was the same every week. And you could just tell the players were going through the motion. So then it comes back to that idea of captivating players. What's my philosophy? My philosophy is to captivate players, give them that hook, that enjoyment, whatever it might be. And I wasn't doing that, albeit because of the vehicle from which the session plan that I was prescribed. So therefore, regardless of what the club thought, I knew the players didn't enjoy it. So, well, why would I facilitate a session they don't enjoy? And after a year, I decided to leave, and I'm happy with that decision now. And I wouldn't go back to that environment. I do my research if I did go back to an environment like that.
I want to draw on your expertise on skill acquisition, something that, again, I'm becoming fascinated by, but a lot of it's just in my head with observations and thinking. I listened to High Performance. I did a post on this just on LinkedIn this morning, High Performance podcast, and Owen Hargreaves talked about going from Canada to Bayern Munich, which has got to be the most unbelievable jump 20 years ago when football wasn't as global. But also, he's talking about, like, his dad was an Englishman who moved over to Canada, a football guy, loved football, but Hargreaves obviously wasn't exposed to that level of football. But he's got a great line or two about playing basketball and how, Hargreaves, I would have said, as a United fan, was an athlete, like a thoroughbred athlete, but he talked about how he was small for a point guard and how basketball taught him to compete physically against players that were taller than him in a different context, great competitiveness, etc., etc. And I wonder about, it's the first time I looked at multi-sport and thought, there's a benefit here of competitiveness that you can take to football rather than just having a general range. What's the research around, again, how do we facilitate? Because I think we all think it's theory, it's great. Listen, they play different sports, that's great. But what's the best way with the research to kind of take a multi-sport approach with someone who is exceptional at football, for example?
I wish I had the answer. I probably don't. Like, I teach a talent ID and youth development module on one of our performance analysis and talent identification, and we talk about this a lot as a topic. I think, again, I'm really conscious of using the word research and academia because that can switch people off. But sometimes that's what research is there for, right? It's there to prove and disprove theory. And the theory goes that playing other sports is good for skill transfer. It lowers burnout. That is kind of, I don't want to say that's a fact because there will be anomalies. The Williams sisters, for example, they are an outlier, 100%. Tiger Woods is an outlier. Federer is the opposite. He played lots of other sports, could have been a footballer. Nadal could have been a footballer. So there are, I could make the argument by talking about Nadal and Federer. Someone else could make the argument of Serena and Tiger. So it's like, well, and Venus. So then it's like, oh, it's 3v2. So it's very difficult. You can always find an example that fits your argument, and it just then becomes a battle of on social media, like which side of the fence, who can find the most athletes that fit their argument. I just look at it from the perspective, again, going back to why players play. There will be players that absolutely love a ball on a wall, and they love the drills, and they love the repetition, and they love working hard, and putting their socks up metaphorically and running the hard. They love that, and they'll make it to the top. But there are more players, statistically speaking, who've done other sports that help to transfer skill. So transfer of skills can be really useful. We often call them donor sports. So in the research, you'll hear them called donor sports, whereby you can take elements of a game, and sometimes you can actually use that. So like, you can use actual rules from other games to teach football. I've done that before. So you can actually literally use the donor sport, the rules, but actually these donor sports can be really good. So like, think of a goalkeeper that's been a gymnast or done things like that can be really useful. Tennis players, for example, they have certain physical attributes. Then you've got the psychological attributes of team sports versus individual sports. But I think donor sports and transfer of skills is something that's really important. And I personally think that's part of the reason why at my club we try and do 1 week in 6 where we have some multi-sports, because some of the players don't play other sports. And I think it's important that we have, in our world, the summer off to let them go and play tennis or cricket. And it might be different in the US and other areas, but the way our seasons work, I think we should be letting them explore other sports as well to help with that transfer, like the Owen Hargreaves example.
Brilliant. Yeah,
that's not really giving you a definitive answer, because I'm not sure there is one. I just think, based on what I've read, I think playing other sports at a young age, and that you might specialize in one a bit more than the others, and at some point you've got to transfer across. Of course, you have Roger Federer, prime example. We had to make that decision, but you've got to specialize eventually if you want to get to the very, very top. Don't get me wrong, but I think at a young age it can help massively.
Yeah, but I like that concept of donor sports, because again, where football is going in my eyes of clinical environments is that, again, part of my post today, if anyway, people probably stop reading after the first 2 lines, but when I watch the Champions League this week, the level of competitiveness, and not just general, listen, they're Champions League footballers, of course they're going to compete, but the willingness, and I saw this, I went to a Barcelona game 6 months ago, and I couldn't believe the physicality of young, small, 19, 20-year-old players, second balls, recovery runs. The more, I suppose, the Rondo generation that we're probably in the process of developing aren't experiencing those in training environments. 50-50s, aerial challenge, the ball never goes in the air in a lot of young practices today. So I wonder if that donor concept that you talked about, if we need to be a bit more deliberate about that there.
Yeah, and look, some of the physical stuff, there will be academics out there that work in this environment that might be shouting at me at the moment. Well, and hopefully that I might agree, but the gist of it is, it's not as simple as, oh, well, if you go and do tennis, you'll have good hand-eye coordination, therefore you'll be a great goalkeeper. It's not as simple. The physical transfer is going to be there, but it will need a little bit of, it needs to be a bit malleable. It needs to be adaptable. It's not going to be as simple as, if you're able to return 140-mile-an-hour serve, you'll be able to make great saves and save over a penalty. It doesn't work like that. But some of the donor sports, the usefulness comes from the psychology as well. Just like Owen Hargreaves said, like learning to be physical, that might not give him bigger biceps or greater strength, but it might give him more competitiveness and determination. And that can't be taught. You could argue that can't be taught. So like that's come directly from being in a 5v5 basketball environment or whatever it might be. And you wouldn't have got that in football necessarily, because there would have been more players on a bigger space. Like that comes through playing that sport, and the psychology transfer is sometimes better than the physical potentially.
Hello coaches, we'll take a quick break here. We are now going into the section where Ashley talks about St Mary's University Performance Football Coaching Masters course. Again, a massive thanks to St Mary's for all the support that they've given us on Modern Soccer Coach. The course that they've put together is absolutely unbelievable. I will put some information below in the links. Please check it out. St Mary's University Performance Football Coaching Masters is a unique opportunity to learn from world-renowned academics and industry experts whilst making significant strides to develop your career and bolster your knowledge of coaching theories. Their course content has been tailored to reflect the diverse football coaching environments across the world. They have worked with industry experts, alumni, designated football partners who have contributed to module design that ensures the students are always getting that industry relevant knowledge. You will need to have achieved a UEFA B, USSF or equivalent coaching qualification from your home country to apply, as well as having either an undergraduate degree or a significant football experience as a player or a coach. If you'd like to learn more, they have a series of online information webinars that are coming up over the next few months, and that will provide you with more detail about the finances, the module content, and further details of how to apply. Link will be in the comments below. Please check them out, and huge thank you to St Mary's for the support.
Brings us along nicely. The complexity of the game, the complexity of coaching the game. How on earth then do you develop a curriculum at St Mary's with a performance masters in performance football coaching? How do you, I suppose, organize the curriculum for a full year, 4 years? Like, what's the process around prioritizing? The scientist will say this, psychologist this, tactician will say this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really challenging. So the masters that we have, it's distance learning. So I talked earlier about meeting the under sixes of my 5-year-old son, meeting where they're at. It's kind of the same concept, really. We've just gone through a revalidation. So we've reviewed the course every 5 years, and we've made some changes, and we spoke to our students, and we spoke to the experts at the university and other universities, and people in the elite game. So, League Managers Association, coaches, players, all that sort of thing. And we're just trying to get a feel for meeting the coaches where they're at. Same principle, whether you're working with under fives or, elite coaches. Our coaches range from, they have to have at least a UEFA B. That might be something slightly different in the US and in Asia, but level 3 of the 5. There's usually 5 coaching qualifications. So they've got to have at least level 3. Most of ours have UEFA A level 4, and a couple have level 5, have played the game. So it's really challenging to meet everyone where they're at. So I guess what we've fallen on is we've kind of gone, well, we didn't have any performance sciences. We didn't have any physical stuff in our previous iteration of the degree. So we've added that bit in, partly because we've got some experts in the field within our department, but also we felt that coaches kind of need to be armed with that. Yes, if they're working at the very elite level, they're going to have analysts and they're going to have, movement coaches and all the others that you might have, but having some understanding of that could be quite important. And we felt that was useful. I'll give you an example as well. We used to have a performance analysis module, and some of the coaches came back to us and said, well, okay, I don't have enough time. You're only teaching me over 12 weeks some skills. You're not teaching me enough to make me an analyst, because I need to do a whole degree for that. Or some of the others said, well, I work in a club where we've got an analyst. We've got a department of analysts. I don't need that. What I really enjoy is looking at the tactics and strategies. So we've kind of flipped it on its head, and we've made it a strategies and tactics module with some analysis software thrown in, and taught them some basic skills, so that if they want to be a coach who's able to clip their software using angles as a profile we use, and we use Playmetrica, for example, we give them that software, we teach them how to use it in the first 6 weeks, and then we apply it to games. So we'll download Y-Scout data, we'll look at games, and it could be their matches, they can film their own matches. So we give them the skills where they can do the basics, but actually it elevates their ability as a coach and elevates their CV at the same time, because we're also trying to make people more employable. So just a few examples there, how we've got this performance sciences and we've got the strategies and tactics. We're trying to adapt. And then we've got, we had a module that we call professional development, as most degrees do. But again, it just felt a little bit basic. So we've now called it leading people in teams, to really try and challenge people's environments they work in. What's the culture? What would you do to change it? Because we think those are the skills that people need. Reflecting and using reflective models, all that stuff's great around professional development, but being able to lead a team as an academy manager or a first team manager, or going and leading a group of people from a different gender, whatever it might be, that we think is more powerful, and therefore is what maybe makes the masters so useful. And we're also dealing with people from all corners of the world, quite literally.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that before. So you just go back to that. You're talking about then, because again, there is this view at the minute of football is that our life just in general of success, reflection, growth, and emotional intelligence. But you're saying there, is it to spark an appetite for change in an organization and manage that there? That's
potentially, yeah. So leading people in teams is a module that I'm going to lead from September. we will get the students to review the culture, and that can be tricky in itself, because we're asking students to go and probably ask some questions. Even if they just internalize it, they've got to go and reflect on their environment and then put a proposal together. And almost the plan will be that they pitch it to a panel of, like, you know, people that work in industry, and get them to kind of, I guess, sell the changes they might make. And they might make none. They might reflect and go, actually, I'm going to analyze how good the environment is, and that's fine. But it's getting them to be reflective in a slightly different way. It's not just, oh, you know, I want to do the A license or pro license, and therefore I need to go and do X, Y, Z on the grass. It's actually a bit more than that. It's giving them skills that makes them more employable, even more employable, because we are working with coaches that are generally working full-time in the game already. But how can they go that next level, like exploring culture, exploring the psychology of the decisions they make in their environment, or the environment makes on them, we think is going to be more powerful than just say, you know, I've reflected and you know, I could do this coaching behavior a bit better, or I need to do this to get on the A license. Like, I think we can go further than that. And I think the football market, unfortunately, is about the market. That is kind of the nuts and bolts of it. I think it demands that, or it will do in the future.
Yeah, I see that 100%. I also see that you said about getting them employable. It's keeping in employment, because if you go in armed only with the technical skills of an analyst, or the technical skills of a data person, or what science, whatever it is, and you can't read those like unwritten culture pieces in the environment, then you're more likely to do more damage. Like it's a lot of things. Like I see this to people, especially analysts, is like football clubs are the most, depending on who you ask, dysfunctional organizations. Like they're highly social, where there's some people that are risk averse, some people that are, you know, you'll have your moaners, some people that are saying, listen, stick to this, some people is rip it up, and you've got to know how to navigate around that. It's a fucking hard thing.
It's really challenging. I mean, in the professional development module this year, because it was called that this year, as we've made the changes this summer, I deliberately threw a curveball in there, and every year I put a weekly topic that I call challenging your assumptions. So I deliberately get guest speakers in who I know work in the complete polarized opposite world to them. So like this year, for example, we've got a lot of coaches that work in academy football. So I reached out to Debbie Sayers, who works for, or is the chairwoman of Salisbury Rovers FC, and people may have seen her work. She's a human rights lawyer by trade, and she takes this idea of like choice and voice, and, you know, every child has a human right for free play, and she takes that concept very seriously, and she's designed her whole club around it. So I reached out to her and I said, look, I want to interview you, and I deliberately want to say, I want you to be honest, and, you know, but I want you to say stuff that's going to deliberately challenge these coaches, because they work in potentially academy football or men's first team football. Therefore, having a human rights lawyer who runs their own club come in and talk about it from human rights, like free play, and letting the players lead the sessions, and do they want music, and are they going into that league, and having children on the board, for example, on their committee making decisions, that is the polar opposite to the environments that some of these coaches will be in. So I deliberately do that, and we're probably going to talk about the work of Minute 9 later on, but, you know, I get Eamon to come in and talk about halftime team talks, and get the students to film their own team talks and challenge their assumptions on what that should look like. So in the course of a week, we sort of, you know, metaphorically, you know, smack them in the face with information that we know will make them reflective. We don't just want to churn out tactics and strategies and that sort of stuff like data and skill acquisition. We think there's some stuff around that can be really powerful.
I love it. I think what coach education has done over here, probably that people don't appreciate, is created a desire or a habit for looking for ways to get better. And now coaches are more, well, again, compared to my background, there was a convention every year that you probably heard about, and that was kind of your development. And if you took a course in between that, but now I've quite a few friends in the game, and 75% of them are on courses of some kind. And these people range from 20 through to 55, 65. Just curious at getting these little things. So what's when an American goes on your course, how do you kind of connect them with the whole community with that there on a remote basis?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. You know, we sometimes get students that are very used to, they've been at college or university, they've been face to face, they've maybe traveled the world, they want to do distance learning because it means they can access, like, this course is fairly unique. There are not many courses like this of master's level that just focus on football. And I think we are one of the only ones that's distance learning, so it's attractive. But sometimes people really like the face to face. Like, formal coach education is necessary, it opens doors, right? But the informal conversations of coach education, again, I don't want to keep using the word research, but the research suggests that the informal kind of water cooler conversations, walking out to the pitch, they are by far more powerful and actually seen as more powerful and positive by coaches. So trying to create those little moments is really challenging. So the way that we do it, we always have an induction at the start. So we try and deliberately get people together. We host like drop-in sessions. We try and mix it up in terms of time zones. So it might be Sunday evening over here, lunchtime in the States, where people can drop in and there are tutors on call, for example. So I'll sit Sunday evening here, but it allows people that aren't, say it's a time off where they're not coaching. It might be an afternoon in the States or Canada where we've got a lot of coaches this year. We also try and run some assessments which require you to get together. So we have a skill acquisition like module, and within that we have a task where students have to come together. So we put people in groups of 4 or 5 and they have to plan a coach education workshop for how they would deliver and educate coaches in their context to understand a skill act concepts that might be differential learning or constrainted approach. And they have to design a kind of, you know, coach education session, effectively a 30-minute presentation, and they have to physically get together. So, you know, we will also drop in, so the online content will always have a forum or a task where they have to respond to each other. So we'll kind of judge their ability to like write a blog post and can they interact with somebody else, and then they're assessed on their ability to interact with other blog posts, for example. There's other little ways. And I guess as well, the final thing we try and do is every single semester we will have a guest speaker. You know, we have a partnership with the League Managers Association and League Coaches Association over here in the UK. So we get some pretty high profile speakers. So every single semester there is a live guest lecture in most of our modules. So there's again that opportunity to come together, like hear from a great speaker, go out into breakout rooms, chat about what you've learned. So it's a challenge, don't get me wrong, and some students do still struggle with that. It's, you know, being distant. But being distant is the draw of the degree. But it also comes with less face-to-face contact. So yeah, that's kind of a few examples of how we try and, you know, keep people feeling part of the community.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. Last part, we'll chat about last 10 minutes, chat about minute 9 here and the work Eamon's done. And obviously, like, we had him on the podcast, was it 8-9 months ago or maybe 12 months ago when it was starting? And to be honest, I've said this to you, Ashley, off air, that I didn't think coaches would be as open and willing in a world of football industry where the walls go up pretty quickly. How the hell has Eamon and you how have you grown this thing to where you're getting in and access to some phenomenal people?
I think, look, credit to Eamon firstly. So, you know, I'm a kind of, I guess my role is consultant / researcher, if you look on my LinkedIn profile for Minute 9. So yeah, I saw Eamon's work a couple of years ago in terms of some context before I answer. And I got him in to speak to a master's students because I thought it was something really different and I wanted to challenge their assumptions. And he came in 2 years in a row and the response from the students was great. And I think I would chat to Eamon all the time, and it became more and more frequent to the point where he said, you know what, you've been a champion in Minute 9 since it's been, you know, this big. It's now this big. Can you come on board to help it go this big, and so on? And in the last 12 months, you know, I've been on board for 6 months of that. It has grown massively, and I've certainly been a champion of it for a couple of years. But Eamon's done some great work, built some great connections. But I think none of that is possible unless you've got a really good idea. It's like having an invention, right, that you patent and, you know, you sell. It's got to be a great idea for people to buy it. And it's the same principle here. The concept of trying to make elite sports teams better is something that managers are always looking for. Trying to find that extra 1% is something, you know, people that listen to podcasts where it's high performance, great managers, you know, from years gone by, they always talk about how do we find that 1%. Because a lot of sports, it's not just football. We work with Gaelic football, rugby, basketball. There's a rugby team in France that we work with. We have very, very high profile football teams as well. And I won't name all of them because some of them don't mind us sharing. But they all have the same issue, right? Technically, tactically, most of their players are all the same, right? They have a few outliers, some unicorns, as we might call them in the talent world, who are just unique. But actually, how do you find that 1%? And sometimes the manager wants to influence that 1%, and half times and match day communication and, you know, setting protocols in place to make your match day communication more effective can be your way of gaining that 1%. You know, it might elicit that emotional reaction at half time that makes your players play that 1% better, that makes them win by that extra goal or that home run or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so sometimes when you're in those environments and the tension and the stress and the pressure is so great, you're kind of so zoomed in on your role that you miss, like you mentioned before about before we start recording, about, you know, a team that didn't have the right food and refueling. But it doesn't surprise me, because I would say most halftime environments, you would look at and say, well, that's you could do this, this, and this, but the people are so focused on their job sometimes. I mean, is that what it is, where the emotion of the actual experience is so high that you're trying to remove them for it?
Yeah, do you know what I think it is as well? It's like, if you get a manager that's willing to put themselves out there, there's no way, like having two people stand in your change room at half time when you're in the, you know, under the pump and you're losing, which is an environment we have been in where a team are losing. It takes a lot of introspection and reflection, and you know, it's a gutsy thing to do to have people external come in. But that's really powerful because it helps you identify your blind spots. And I think almost every team we work with, when we kind of do a match day report, or it might be that some clubs just send us footage that they've recorded at their half time. Some clubs send us the footage and we go and watch them do what we call a match day observation. Some clubs we work with for weeks at a time. Some we only have fleeting interactions with. Some it might be they come and listen to me and Eamon speak at a conference like we did at Leeds Beckett a few months ago. But it's trying to highlight your blind spot. So we've worked with teams, and like, I'll give an example of one where manager is standing with their assistant manager with a tactics board. Traditionally, tactics boards come with red and blue counters, right? The team play in black and white. And I'll kid you not, the players didn't know which colour they were. And I was standing in the corner with Eamon, and we were both making notes, and we deliberately don't interfere with each other's notes, because we try and then at the end we give a report and we combine our two reports. I looked at Eamon, he looked at me, and we both had exactly the same thought. And I leant over and said, which team are they, blue or red? And the players were doing the same. And a week later, we spoke to the manager and assistant, like straight after the game, and we gave our report back. And the manager was like, I never even thought about that. Like, so they now have colors, and you can also buy magnets that have like hands and heads to show direction, because so you just get a red circle, right, or a blue circle. It doesn't give you any idea. So like the effectiveness of their message was being lost, albeit maybe only by one or two players. But if that's your goalkeeper and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, so like blind spots are all over the place. And sometimes having someone external come in, it spots those blind spots. And there's an example of like a really silly one, but it was just so obvious and no one had ever pointed it out. And of course, you know, you're not going to get one of the players put a hand up and say, you know, this was like pre-game, right? Christmas fixture. This team are in the playoffs in an elite men's league, in the football league. They're not going to put their hand up and go, which colour are we? That's probably going to be a fine, or, you know, in our football system, players love fines and they'd get ridiculed and laughed at, but they're probably all thinking the same thing. So yeah, to answer your question, I think blind spots are, you know, things that people, elite managers we're finding, they want to try and find them more and more now. And that's kind of where Eamon and the team, I think there's about 8 or 9 of us now, come in to try and help.
Oh, it's a great, it sounds so businessy, but it's a great niche in the market. Like I see it a lot where there's almost a community of coaches that are under the surface that are looking for those ways, and they don't put it on LinkedIn, and they don't put it on their press conferences, but there is a real thirst about high achieving coaches that they will, and they take feedback really, really well, because again, when you're used to delivering it in a time sensitive fashion with pressure on, you're probably then appreciative of receiving it in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And look, we found that some of the managers, a lot of them initially paid for the privilege themselves. They paid out of their own pocket to have us come in, because there isn't budget on something like, we've gone non-league, we've gone Premier League. Some clubs, you know, they see it as a massive added value, and therefore they work with the manager in minute 9. But some managers do it off their own back. It might be they're on a coaching course and they deliberately want to try and prove something. I think like we went in at Christmas to an EFL, English Football League, a team in League Two. I won't name them, but they're happy for us to name them. But I won't say who it was. But we've used their footage in training, so they're happy to do that. And that was done off their own back, high pressure. And as far as we're aware, that is the first time any English football manager, male or female, has ever allowed anyone external into their changing room. Now, obviously, over here we have Amazon Prime, and there's loads of great Amazon Prime documentaries, All or Nothing, and managers being filmed in the changing room in football. But as far as we're aware, we think that's the only time someone external has been allowed to go into a changing room and observe and film and do warts and all, because people are very sensitive to that. They don't want that. Interestingly enough, we've actually found that potentially, and Eamon probably will talk more of this because he works with more clubs than I do, that actually non-English managers are a little bit more open, and non-football sports are a little bit more open to the ideas. That probably won't come as a massive surprise to everybody. It's a bit like US sports in particular. They have a lot of great ideas and a lot of staff in those environments, so maybe they're a bit more open to challenging those things. But yeah, it's very difficult to get into English football in particular. It can be challenging, quite insular. People don't want to give away their secrets.
Yeah, people also don't want to be the next John Sutton or Graham Taylor, right? You don't want to be. I think there's a fear, even though, of course, you're not going to release that to any. It's not going to go on those stations. But I think there's part of that. I think there's also a bit of insecurity around the fact that if we all dream as a coach. The coach in me would have dreamt to be Al Pacino. And that any given Sunday speech, and you think that you actually really charismatic to deliver that. And then I got to a stage where I realized, I think my speeches are just bang average. People are nodding to get me out of the room quicker. So I think there's a lot to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've interviewed a couple of high profile managers, and some of them are aware of that, and they know that the players just want to be left alone. There's actually a research paper called Any Given Sunday that talks about half times, and for that reason. But one of the key messages we have at Minute 9, we have a halftime protocol, and we do other stuff other than just halftime. But one of the things we talk about halftime is being honest and saying, just leave the players alone. Just leave them alone. Just for a bit, but please just leave them alone for a bit of time at least. And most of the players want to be left alone as well. It's highly match day, especially in elite sports. It's highly anxious time. It's hugely emotional time as well. So having some time just to come down, rehydrate, eat. Those are a few of the things we talk about. And Eamon probably talk about it more. But the title Minute 9 suggests that leaving the players alone for 9 minutes, that is part of the protocol, is leaving them alone for, it's not always perfectly 9 minutes, but that's kind of where the name came from, I think.
I went back and watched the Arsenal one recently, the Amazon one, and it wasn't the halftime, it was the pre-game that he brings the
photographer.
The photographer?
I think the photographer was retiring or something.
I thought there's a lot of it, because there's pieces that I'm looking at it actually rewinding, going oh, this is a different changing room than what the clip was 2 seconds ago. So they've, but that obviously was a deliberate. How the hell did he know that the photographer could deliver a speech as good as that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that taps into emotion at Minute 9, and it's not just Minute 9, but good presenters, they'll tell stories and they use emotion. And also there's the novelty effect, right? If you did that every week, it wouldn't work. If you shouted every week, it wouldn't work. If you were quiet every week, if you left them alone every week. But the novelty effect of that guy coming in, and he spoke from the heart, right? He spoke with emotion. I think he got upset. He was cared for by the players and the staff in the room. They all cared about him. So therefore his emotion and his story, they could all relate to it. So it became more powerful. I think there's the one where Arteta puts the light bulb on as well. He uses that light bulb. He turns the light bulb on, talks around, I think it's about firing up the stadium or something, and the energy to light up the light bulb. Those things can be really powerful. They wouldn't work every week. But yeah, that's a really good example of deliberately doing that.
All right, last one, Frank. There's a controversial one, but you said about English managers being reluctant to it. And there is a phase of okay, so I'm going to take a high profile job, high level players, and I'm English, and I'm going to use some of those stuff. And he used the light bulb or the one that he done the heart one, the diagram. Is it harder, do you think, in the culture of English football for an English person to get more buy-in, or is it easier for someone with a foreigner, like who's a different background?
I think sometimes in the UK, and this is probably English men's football, there's a stereotype of foreign managers are more innovative. Your Arsene Wenger's, your Serena Wiegman's, and that they get success because they've got innovation and they've had an upbringing, or I always hear people say, well, they grew up in the sunshine and they're outside, all that little things like that. I think it's really challenging. The media in the UK can be really harsh on English managers. On the flip side, they can be encouraging of English managers and they can be negative to foreign managers. Like, for example, I have, and again, I won't name names, but I was with a Premier League manager 2 weeks ago with Minute 9. And we suggested, as part of our protocol, is that the manager sits in the stand. Rugby, do it. Obviously, in the US, it's not massive. But in rugby, there are no managers that sit pitch side. It's a rubbish view. You get caught up in the emotion. And all that, and managers in Gaelic football and rugby, they sit in the stand because you get a better view. And we suggested that to this manager, Premier League manager, and he gave up hours of his time. And we stayed for lunch and we had a great conversation. He wasn't English, and he said to us, "Football gut instinct. I'm foreign. We were getting beat heavily one week. We're under pressure in the media. If I, as a non-English manager, was to sit in the stand, I would be under more scrutiny than if I was English." And that was a prime example of where football gut instinct versus Minute 9 protocol, there was a clash, because we were suggesting something we think's right. And by the way, the manager knew we were right, and he said as much. But he said the social perception of that action of sitting in the stand, even just for half time, up to half time, the media story would play out, and it would be the negative would far outweigh the positive, even though it shouldn't. And he felt that being a foreign manager would have a detrimental effect. So it wouldn't be seen as innovation. It would be seen as, someone messing up the standard protocol.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Again, we could do another one on this, but I watched Match of the Day in the hotel Saturday night, and Emery, who are Villa playing on Saturday?
I can't remember the top of my head. Yeah, they drew, I think, didn't they?
But anyway, the other team nearly scored on a counter attack, and there was a player that probably didn't recover where he was supposed to. And Emery's done, like, he's thrown his, but he's done it like 5 times running down the sideline. And the first thing the guy showed a replay of it, and of course was like, look at the emotion of Emery. And I was thinking, if an English manager done that, he'd be destroyed for looking like a mug,
It's seen as like a foreign personality trait, like being, Mourinho, and like that analysis doesn't probably get done in the female game over here, elite female game. We probably don't put it under the microscope as much in the female game, but certainly the male, elite foreign coaches are under a little bit of scrutiny. But I also think so with the English ones. So it's fascinating. And there's probably a few more stories I could tell, but there's an example of how that is viewed. That's the psychology of it, right? That's what elite sports men and women are dealing with.
There was a thing came on my YouTube yesterday of Arsenal v PSG from 1991, and it was ITV site. So I looked at it because it was really good footage. I was like, I never remember this from that they played when they won the Cup Winners' Cup. And it was a semi-final, and they played in Paris, and they interviewed, it's just like quick clips, and they interviewed George Graham at halftime. And George Graham talked for so long about the game that I thought it was a post-game interview. And it's so different to what the game is now, where coaches, again, are more, it's cliche, but it gets them off the hook, right? Because you're not judged if you say, listen, good half, keep it tight. Whereas George Graham talks about, like, well, Valdo's dropped off the line, and we need to took us 15 minutes to pick him up and all this other stuff. And you're thinking, you've got another 45 minutes to play. But it just shows you, like, the pressure in the media that play a role, or that you can't really do a lot of stuff as well for these guys. They got to be careful.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that extra 1%, that's what I guess Minute 9 and in my other roles, we're always trying to find that extra 1%, whatever that might be.
well, feel free to use George Graham as an example for minute 9, because he talked for 9 minutes and it's by the time he got into the changing room, you know.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting one. He's left the players alone but bored to death the interviewer.
Media probably wasn't that long, but actually brilliant. We'll put the information for St Mary's below for the course, and we'll also put the minute 9 stuff up as well. But I really appreciate you jumping on. We'll do it again because these are some brilliant topics we need to delve into a bit more. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and happy to answer any questions if anyone's got any off the back of it.